first just take a moment to applaud. Thank you, Karen. And as you probably know, she's an award-winning journalist, and she reports extensively on AI and the intelligence industry. She's been honored by Time 100 AI list and also received an American Humanist Media Award. And she co-hosts the BBC podcast, The Interface, so you can continue to follow her work there. And she is really the leading journalist on AI. So it's a great honor to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today. And the last thing that I want to do before turning to the questions that we have is just acknowledge that today we'll be talking about how AI is really perpetuating the next advancement of empire and capitalism in the world today. And when we think about empire, it's important for us to acknowledge that we are here in the belly of the beast of the greatest empire in the history of the world, the United States government and the United States empire. And I know that all of us are carrying in our hearts the reality of what's happening all around the world right now in terms of US aggression. And it's important for us to ground down where we are and understand that we are here in so-called New Mexico, but in the heart of Tewa territory, and that we are doing this work to fight empire in all of its forms and colonization in all of its forms in solidarity with Indigenous communities that have led the fight against colonialism and empire since the beginning of this country. And it's important that we always orient in that direction and recognize that our work is the work in solidarity with land protectors and water protectors who continue to fight to protect these beautiful lands where we are all residing. And so I want to not just do a land acknowledgement for the sake of the naming of whose territory this is, but also that this work specifically around resource extraction is an extension of the ongoing colonization of this place. So thank you for just acknowledging that with me and grounding in that. And now let's turn and learn a lot from Karen. So to start, I think it's important for folks to just understand who you are and how you came to this work. You know so much and you come from inside that world. So could you share a little bit about how you came to learn about AI and want to take on this work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you, Bianca, for the wonderful framing and introduction. So I am an engineer by training. I studied mechanical engineering at MIT for undergrad. And I was attracted to engineering when I was in college because I believed that in order to make the world a better place, technology would be the best tool for social change. I was in particular very passionate about trying to mitigate climate change. So it kind of comes full circle now, being able to be in conversation with new energy economy. And I realized once I graduated and I moved to San Francisco and I started working in what I was told was the premier technology innovation hub of the world, that this innovation ecosystem was deeply problematic. And the pivotal moment for me that helped me begin this realization was I was working for this mission-driven startup that was focused on building technologies in the fight against climate change. And then the board fired the CEO because the company was not profitable. And it suddenly dawned on me that this innovation ecosystem is geared towards building profitable technologies, not towards technologies that have positive social impact. Perhaps profitable technologies can have a positive social impact, but also if it doesn't, that's fine as long as the people at the top are making money. And I realized in that moment that if I tried to stay within this ecosystem and work on the problems that I cared about, like climate change, which are not profitable problems, that I would just always be fighting against the grain and would potentially be co-opted into a machinery that I didn't actually agree with. And so I had a bit of a existential crisis in that moment where I just didn't know what to do because I spent all of my time studying for what I thought would be a career, a lifelong career in the tech industry. But I had always loved writing. And so almost as a like a whim of the moment, I thought, well, if I can't use technology as my tool for social change, maybe I can use writing as my tool for social change. And that must mean that I should become a journalist. And so I quit my job and I jumped into the journalism industry to see whether or not that was the right place for me. And after some spurts and starts over 2 years of doing a lot of unpaid work, because the journalism industry is not an easy place, I landed in a role at MIT Technology Review covering AI. And it was completely by coincidence. I was assigned this role. It wasn't that I was seeking the role. And in fact, when I received the job offer, it was the only job offer that I received after dozens of job applications. And I was so disappointed. Like, I was like, this is the outcome of my job search. I have to cover AI. And I thought the technology was so boring and so irrelevant. And then when I took the job, I very quickly then realized when I started connecting with other people that had been doing work of AI accountability for a while now that actually this is the perfect place because AI intersects with so many aspects of society. It centers all these questions around who has power in society, who gets to determine our collective future. And that is then how I set off on the journey, starting in 2018, of covering the technology, the industry, and all of the dynamics at play.
Wow. I love that. I love that the universe basically handed you this assignment, and that you took it, and that we are all benefiting from it now. So talk to us about your book. The Empire of AI. Empire is the frame. Clearly you care a lot about what is happening in the world. You shared that your whole career was started looking for how you can make a difference. But talk to us about how you understand empire and this particular version and why you frame things that way.
Yeah, so my book ultimately tells the story of OpenAI, but it uses that story as a way to traverse the history of AI development and show how we got to where we are today. And I am very critical of where we are today. But I would frame it by saying, like, it's not that I'm critical of all AI technologies, and it's important to understand that AI refers to such a broad category of different technologies. I sometimes say the word AI is like the word transportation. Transportation can refer to everything from a bicycle to a rocket. And so when we ask about what AI can do for us, we should first be asking which kind of AI are we even talking about? Are we talking about the bicycles of AI or are we talking about the rockets of AI? And in this moment, the world has become obsessed with the rockets of AI, the version of AI that is manifested in the most resource consumptive, extractive, and exploitative form. And the reason is because OpenAI as a company, when they were designing their technologies, they conceived that they were ultimately in this grand existential race to try and build so-called artificial general intelligence, a theoretical AI machine that would reach the same capabilities as humans, and that they needed to do it first because there would be evil people that might get there instead and then lead to humanity's demise. And so the reason why I use this analogy to empire is it's the only one that has helped me be able to, like, it's the only one that makes sense to capture the sheer scale of what we're talking about in terms of the amount of resources that are now being used to develop these rockets of AI, in terms of the religious aspect of this quest, the way that OpenAI frames what they're doing as ultimately building something akin to a machine god or a machine demon that will either bring us to heaven or to hell, and the fact that they're competing with an evil empire, the fact that they propose that there's this one model that's meant to be a one-size-fits-all solution for every single person in the world, and that this model is curated from data that is only selected by a very small group of people sitting in the Bay Area that are working in, American English, that are working under the norms of San Francisco, and that are then trying to project all of these linguistic choices and these value choices to every single population around the world. And the last part or the two other parts of the parallels, I mean, there's infinite parallels to empire, but another aspect is there's an extraordinary amount of labor exploitation that happens in the development of these systems. And of course, these systems are now being designed to be labor automating as well, which is a political choice that these companies made. You don't have to actually develop AI systems to replace the workforce, but they did so that they can sell it to executives at companies saying, you're going to save money if you fire your workforce and buy our technology instead. So it's built on exploitation. It also perpetuates exploitation. And the last parallel is the fact that these companies have really begun to monopolize our understanding of this technology by insisting that they're the only ones that have access to the inner workings of the things that they're building. And therefore, if anyone doesn't like what they're building, it's just because they don't get it. They just don't have enough visibility into what's actually being done. And this is not just how they exercise power over the public. It's also how they exercise power over policymakers and how they exercise power over scientists. So there are a dwindling number of scientists now that work in the public interest in academic institutions studying the limitations and capabilities of these technologies. Most of the scientists have been absorbed by the industry itself and are sort of like mouthpieces of the industry now in only producing research papers that align with the empire's agenda.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about that piece in terms of power. So who are the architects of the AI industry right now? And you spoke a bit about this race that they are perceiving, and the fact that there is also these firewalls against access. But and the exploitation piece. But so who is benefiting, and like who, when you talk about the race and the folks that are driving this, who are they, and are they thinking that they're motivated by benevolence, or talk a little bit about what is motivating them, how concentration of power is playing out, and also what do we see in terms of this religiosity, or this idea of this as a worldview that they're really putting out into the world?
Every single tech billionaire that you can think of has a massive stake in the AI race. Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Elon Musk actually was one of the co-founders of OpenAI, and then he was kind of muscled out. Google's executive Sundar Pichai, Microsoft's executive Satya Nadella, Jeff Bezos, like all of them, all of their companies are the main players that are now racing in this AI race. And also, in terms of the other beneficiaries, there was this Bloomberg article that came out last year that showed that the AI race has minted billionaires at a faster pace than any other industry in history. So there's also a new class of tech billionaires that's being created. And these are executives at these companies that aren't necessarily the chief executive, but people like Mira Murati, who was originally the chief technology officer at OpenAI that then split off and started her own company. Ilya Sutskever, who was the chief scientist at OpenAI that split off and started his own company. Demis Hassabis, who is the head of DeepMind, which is a London-based AI lab that Google then acquired. And so he's the number 2 at Google under the CEO. All of them have also generated billions in wealth. And this is like one of the ways that you see the deep inequality that's built into the way that AI is being produced right now, is that these people are already, like, even when there's not that much value coming out of their technologies, they're already billionaires. They've already earned extraordinary riches. And there's all this conversation now about how the AI industry and the actions of these billionaires are in fact beginning to seriously destabilize the economy. And there's all this talk of a bubble. And when the bubble collapses, that's not going to be felt by them. That's going to be felt by everyone else. And so this is like how you can begin to see the kind of the notion of hierarchy in the way that they've constructed the system of power, is that they believe in their worldview that they actually deserve to be enriched so greatly by the things that they are doing. And to your question of whether or not they think that they're actually doing something benevolent, they do. They do have these really strong stories that they tell themselves first and foremost, that what they are doing is ultimately good for the world. I don't think that you can have, as much power as Musk or Altman or any of the other people and believe that you're the bad guy. Like you have to tell yourself, like you have to self-delude really heavily to think that every morning you are waking up to make contributions to society. But it is based on this extremely narrow and toxic worldview that it's okay if ultimately in the quest to try and do something great of historic importance, they devastate the earth, devastate communities, and devastate everyone else.
Yes, and I was gonna ask you to go there next, which is what is it actually costing? So we've got the extractive element, we've got the labor element that you've mentioned, but what does it require to actually create these data centers? Can you just draw the picture for us in terms of resource and labor extraction?
Yeah, so I'll first say how many data centers are being laid because it's insane. Um, it's so hard to communicate the scale of what's happening because I actually think that the companies use such extraordinary scales as a strategy because then they can toss around numbers that people have never even encountered in their life so that there's no way to actively grasp what that even means. Like OpenAI, Sam Altman has said that he wants to build $10 trillion of data centers just for OpenAI by 2033. And like most people have not encountered 10 trillion of anything, let alone $10 trillion. And so there's this almost shock, like you're stunned into submission. And those $10 trillion of data centers, he estimates would be, 250 gigawatts of power, which when you do the math, like New York City as an entire city on average uses around 5.5 gigawatts of power. So that's 4 dozen New York cities of data centers that he's talking about building just for his company. And then you layer in the fact that all of these companies are racing, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, everyone all wants a piece of the pie. So they're all trying to outrace each other in the amount of data centers that they're constructing. And if then multiply 250 gigawatts by whatever. Yesterday I was in Vancouver and I was meeting with this professor who mentioned he studies energy and specifically nuclear energy. And he said that roughly the US as a whole is around 1,000 gigawatts. So that's 25% of US energy grid capacity. And we would need to apparently double it just to support 4 of these companies' grand ambitions. And the facilities themselves are also like each facility itself is also astronomically large. The most infamous one is one being built by Meta in Louisiana.
What's the name of town?
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. So this is the largest supercomputer that's under construction right now for the AI industry, and it will be 1/5 the size of Manhattan.
Jeez.
And use that facility alone will use half the average power demand in New York City, 2.2 gigawatts. And Meta wants it to become 5 gigawatts, which would then be almost on par with the entire city of New York. And so then you talk about like, what is, other than energy, what is this costing us? I mean, extraordinary amounts of mineral extraction to build the actual data centers, all the computer chips that have to go inside and the servers, and then the amount of water that is used to cool these facilities, as well as to generate the energy for powering the facilities, because you need water to produce energy, and it's usually fresh water. And Bloomberg had an investigation as well looking into where these facilities are going, and they're often in the desert, just like the data center facilities that are coming here in New Mexico. And 2/3 of the facilities are now in water stressed areas, and most of those water stressed areas are actually in high and extremely high water stress. And then you have like, what are the energy sources that you're actually using? It's fossil fuel based energy sources, because that's what's available right now, and these companies aren't waiting around for renewable capacity to be built. And in fact, a lot of the renewable energy sources don't work because they need these facilities to run 24/7. And so they will always have backups that are still fossil fuel based. So all around the world and in the US in particular, we've seen coal plants having their lives extended, natural gas plants having their lives extended. Elon Musk in Memphis, Tennessee, he was building the Colossus supercomputer for training Grok, the chatbot associated with Twitter. And he just wheeled in 35 methane gas turbines to plug directly into the facility, which are then pumping tens of thousands of toxins into this community. And of course, it's a working class community, it's a rural community, it's Black and brown community. And no one even told them because the deal was signed in the dead of night. And all of a sudden, they just started smelling gas in their living rooms, being like, what's going on? And that's how they discovered that this massive infrastructure had been built without any of their consent. And so it's not just a climate crisis, it's also an environmental justice issue, a public health issue. Like these communities that are on the front lines now, they are experiencing being squeezed and having their fundamental rights to clean air and clean water taken away.
Yeah, and also just you hit on the decision making too, and I think it's important to say, like, here in New Mexico, we have Project Jupiter happening down south. That project circumvented all the regular channels. There was a last minute effort in the legislature last year to create an avenue for microgrids that are unregulated, so that the 2 gas turbines that project will require could not be subject to regular, utility regulations. And that project will use more energy than all of our metropolitan areas combined. So in terms of climate impact, but what you're saying in terms of environmental justice is so important, because who gets to decide, right? And this is happening all over the country, as these microgrids are just popping up in people's backyards without any oversight. And also, can you talk a little bit about the land? I mean, in addition to the minerals and the water, and the energy, these are huge campuses, correct?
Yeah, they're huge. I mean, like, yeah, the fact that the Meta supercomputer is literally going to be like 1/5 the size of Manhattan, but that's like multiple Central Parks. I don't know if people have been to Central Park. I wish I had like a comparison to New Mexico. It's probably, like a significant part of the state's land. And the Project Jupiter is an OpenAI project, by the way. And what's extraordinary is, so OpenAI, they were the ones that launched the Stargate initiative with President Trump at the start of Trump's second term. And it's initially was conceived as a $500 billion investment in data centers. The Jupiter project is 165 billion, but then Altman was like, actually, we want $10 trillion of data centers. So we actually even like chucked away the 500 billion number and upped the ante even further. And what's so crazy is there was recently reporting that came out that one of the other Stargate projects, it's a project in Abilene, Texas. They're actually, OpenAI is now abandoning part of the project because the amount of time it has taken to construct this data center means that the computer chips in this facility are now not the most cutting edge computer chips, and OpenAI doesn't want them anymore. And so they're literally popping up at speed these huge pieces of infrastructure that they might abandon at any moment. And then the community is stuck with this, like, what do you do with that? And it's not providing the community any benefit. I mean, the companies love to say that it's going to generate jobs, that it's going to generate tax revenues. And for a lot of smaller towns, especially, former industrial bases that are really suffering economically, this seems like a really great premise. The problem is the jobs are not permanent. They're talking about construction jobs, and those construction jobs aren't even coming from the local community. They actually ship in workers from other data center projects to help support this data center project, because you can't just immediately upskill the population to build a data center locally, especially based on the timelines that these companies want everything constructed. And then afterwards, you have maybe like a huge facility that uses more energy than the entire state combined. That might long term have 400 jobs. And again, it might not even be coming from the local community, like it just might be people moving into the state to take those jobs. And then with the tax revenue, yes, it does generate taxes, but like towns, these companies will also pit the towns against each other in a competition for getting the data center facility to their towns. And so many towns also then just give tax breaks to the companies because they want to attract the facility there. And so the tax revenues are severely dented anyway. And I was reporting on this one facility in the greater Phoenix area that was being built by Microsoft for OpenAI. And they made all of these promises about how the facility would be sustainable, it would be, 100% renewable energy, a solar, that it would ultimately give back all of the water that it used at a clean enough quality that it could just be plugged directly back into the drinking water system, because that's exactly where they were taking it from. They were taking it from the drinking water system. And then they started constructing the project. And it turned out that the facility, when the water ran through the facility to cool it, it got so polluted that it didn't even meet the standard for the wastewater treatment facility.
Wow.
And then it was just too expensive to clean the water. And so Microsoft just abandoned that promise. But it was like, what is the town gonna do? They've already accepted the project and it's already being built. So the town has no more leverage. And that's just, like story time and time again is that towns think that they're going to benefit, but in the long term, because the companies have so much power, they can just erode away any of the commitments that they made, and the town can't do anything about it.
Right. And back to the initial premise, the project is not about spreading wealth, it's about concentrating wealth in the aim of, empire. And I think that is very clear in terms of them, basically preying on places like New Mexico where we have cheaper land, which is, part of the reason why they're coming. And also communities that are very vulnerable. Can you talk a bit about the labor side of things? Because like you said, that is one of the promises that's being made. You talked about the actual construction, how a lot of times those jobs don't actually manifest for the local community. But let's talk about the dynamics with labor, both in terms of displacing people's jobs, because of what AI is bringing on board, and also what's happening inside the industry in terms of the labor, where people are really being subjected to some horrible conditions and experiences.
Yeah, I just remembered one stat that I want to share before we get to the labor, which is going back to the size and the land. So that Meta facility, it's 400 times larger than the first data center that Meta ever built. So these supercomputers are of a fundamentally different breed than like the typical data centers that we need for our digital services. And the industry, there's like a common piece of misinformation that the industry uses where they're like, well, we need data centers for the modern economy. If you like using the internet, then you can't, protest this data center. The data centers for like the internet are completely of a different kind. Like 400 times, 1 to 400 is extraordinary. So on the labor piece, I mean, one of the other myths that the industry perpetuates is that these technologies are fully automated. And they're not, because in order for these technologies to learn any of the things that they then do, there need to be tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of humans that actually provide the model with many, many, many examples of that thing being done. And so the fact that chatbots can chat is because there are all of these people that are employed, contracted by these companies to chat with the large language model after an AI model is developed, and actually then teach it. This is what dialogue looks like. This is what it looks like when two humans talk to each other. The first human says something, the second human says something back, and then maybe the first human says something again. And before the model is given those examples, it doesn't work like a chatbot. It can't do it. It just generates like random things, because that's how limited these AI systems are without the careful curation and training of people. And there's also a lot of labor that is used to then make sure the models don't spew harmful content. because the way that they're trained, the companies scrape the internet in order to train the systems. And the amount of data that they're using is so vast that they do not have the ability to manually audit what they're actually putting into these models. And so you end up, they're scraping Reddit, they're scraping Twitter, they're scraping all these other places that clearly have a bunch of toxicity of people yelling at each other online. And then there are other people that become human shields in doing content moderation work to try and get this stuff out before it reaches the user. And in my book, I talk about how OpenAI contracted workers in Kenya to do some of the worst content moderation work. And they were exposed to the worst possible things that you could imagine from the internet because they had to see, like, not just the worst content that already existed on the internet, but OpenAI was prompting its models to imagine even worse content so that they could cover the bases of all of the possible things that once they put this tool in the hands of like tens of millions of users, that users might try to use the model for. And so these workers just broke down psychologically. They developed social anxiety, social isolation, PTSD. Some of them, their families fell apart because how do you support a family when you've become a shell of a person and you can't even sustain yourself? And that, at the time when I wrote the book, the industry was beginning to, like, they had put all of the worst parts of like the labor supply chain to outside of the US because that's how, of course, capitalism works and colonialism works, where you just push it to the places where hopefully your users are unaware of. But because their need for this labor is so vast, like, they are marketing and positioning these things as everything machines that can do anything for anyone. And so think about how many people you now have to contract to teach these models to do every possible thing in the world. And so now the work is coming to the US. And there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of, college students that are graduating in a terrible economy, cannot find a job, and now are doing the same exact data annotation work. There are people now being laid off because executives think that they can replace their workers with this AI model. And then that person is doing data annotation for the very job that they were laid off for. That would then perpetuate further layoffs because as the models improve in their capabilities, there will then be more layoffs. And I talked with one worker in Oregon just last week who got a project exactly like the content moderation. But for the Kenyan workers, they were working with text because at the time, the chatbots were only working in text. And now we're talking about image generators and video generators. And so this college graduate in Oregon was exposed to the most horrific videos that were all AI generated videos, imagining, sexual crimes, imagining like extraordinary violence, like people harming themselves. And he was exposed to this for just an hour before he was like, I cannot do this anymore, and just completely exited himself out of the project. And I interviewed him, when I interviewed him last week, it's already been months. I think it's been more than 6 months since he did that project. And he still started sweating and his muscles started tensing the moment I asked him about this work.
Um, talk to us about like where is choice in this yeah, project of empire? Because that's part of what's happening, right? Is I think it's helpful for all of us who are just lay people to understand like the pervasiveness, right, of AI and do we even get to choose whether we're participating? Because hearing how horrendous this industry is, I think everyone here would like to opt out from supporting it. But talk about the pervasiveness and where we're actually seeing its deployment, and also how it is that we're not getting to choose that this is the direction of the economy. Like these folks are engineering things in this direction without political consent even.
Yeah, so this is where I know we talked about a lot of dark things, but this is where I'm actually extraordinarily optimistic because there's already massive movements blossoming all around the country to exercise that choice and to actually shape the trajectory of AI development. We are seeing dozens of protests popping up in communities all around the US to protest data centers. And I cannot tell you enough how much of an impact it is having, because these companies are freaking out by the fact that they cannot build data centers everywhere at the speed that they want to anymore. And they are literally now trying to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in the upcoming midterm elections to try and force their agenda through the political process. That's hundreds of millions that they wouldn't have spent otherwise. So they're wasting all this money now to try and do what they would have done in the dead of night if people were not engaging in these protests. We've also seen people use litigation in really effective ways, artists and writers that are suing the companies for the intellectual property infringement, parents that are suing these companies for the psychological harm to their kids. A couple weeks ago, I met Megan Garcia, who is the mother of Sewell Setzer III, who is a 14-year-old boy who died by suicide after being sexually groomed by a character AI's chatbot, another AI company. And through lawsuits like hers, she's completely transformed the national and international conversation about the harm and readiness of these tools to actually be integrated into our society and to be affecting our kids. And in fact, there are so many bills that are now popping up all around the US at the local level that are now trying to block and ban the harms that these models have on kids. And once again, like, that's yet more work that the tech companies now have to do to try and lobby and kill those bills. And have they been successful in killing some of the bills? Yes. But are they working extra hard and stretching themselves thin now in order to cover every single jurisdiction? Also, yes. Like, they are really trying to outrace, this organic swell of people everywhere across America that are protesting on the streets or using litigation or using these legislative actions to counter the way that the industry is going. And so, like, when I was writing the book, I was really, really concerned that the book just would not land, because at the time, like, books take a really long time to come out. And at the time, the conversation was just about AI is the future. It's this wonderful technology. Sam Altman is a genius. And I was like, people are going to think that I'm a conspiracy theorist. Like, they are not going to be, like, the tone of the book is just so different from the tone of the conversation. By the time it came out, the tone had 180'd. And so that is the effect of people mobilizing and starting these conversations in their communities and educating themselves about the true underbelly of this industry. And so in recent polls, we've seen that 80% of Americans now think that the AI industry needs to be regulated. Yeah. Yes. When was the last time 80% of Americans were on the same side of an issue? I mean, this is, like, remarkable. And this is why I have so much hope, because I actually think it's not just about the AI conversation. It's like AI has become almost a gateway issue for people to start re-engaging with democracy across issues. People are coming to town halls in full force once again to have face-to-face conversations with their elected officials in a way that we just have not seen in a really long time, especially because we had the pandemic for a really long time and, like, we lost that muscle. And this is the thing that is reigniting people's energy and help establishing, like, this opportunity for people to exercise their democratic muscles.
Wow. In terms of our role as consumers, how do we take responsibility for that side of things? So where do we see agency that we can exercise in terms of our choices, in terms of how this is moving through our economy? Are there ways that communities are also pushing back in terms of protecting some of the actual human derived labor and resource in terms of, you know, what we're making in the world. I think a lot of people have concerns about the centrism of technology that AI represents in our society. So yeah, talk to us about that side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as consumers, like the thing that I would say, and what I always say to audiences is, first of all, that I don't use these tools, but also like that's a choice for me, and everyone sort of needs to make their own choice. But when making that choice, recognize that there is a difference. There's like a myriad options between the binary that is usually presented to us, which is either you don't use it at all and then you're a Luddite and against technology, or you have to use it for every possible thing. You know, like there's like you could use it for some things, not use it for others. But in making the choice, like go through the process yourself at first, like what are the goals that you're ultimately trying to accomplish in your life? And is AI even the right tool for that goal? And part of the reason why I don't use it is an ethical stance, because been investigating this industry for so long. But part of it is also that it just doesn't have utility for anything that I want to do in my life. Like you know, in my career, the things that I think are my strengths are my ability to build empathy with sources and my ability to tell compelling stories. And AI just doesn't help with that. And so by refraining from using it, I am also not exacting a cost on myself. But that's not always true for other people. Like I talk with, you know, some freelance journalists who they are just like squeezed so much in the time pressure to compete with other freelancers on getting contracts. And so the way that they use these tools is by responding to emails faster so that they can get another gig. And like I could never tell someone in that situation, like, no, you absolutely can't use that tool. That's like you're horrible for doing that. But then the second question, after you've determined like where would AI be an actual targeted helpful intervention in my life, is then which AI tool should you use? Because not all AI tools are created equal. And what I would always recommend is to try and find tools that are not being made by the empires. And one of the examples of this is there's a company called Hugging Face. It is this AI company that is a platform for aggregate. It hosts a library of open source AI models from all around the world. And the difference between open source and these closed models that OpenAI or Google offers is that anyone can download it for free and then start using it. And it does not, every time you use it, your data stays with you. It does not run through a corporate server. And that is a really, really key way to be able to tap into the utility of these products without also fortifying the empire, because every time your data goes through OpenAI or Google servers, that's yet more data that they can use to generate the next iteration of their technology. And especially when you're using it for work tasks, that's yet more data that they can use to then automate that work task away. Also, like going back to the concept of AI being a collection of technologies, and there's like bicycles of AI and rockets of AI, you know, you also don't have to use chatbots or large language models. That is the form of AI that we are most familiar with. But there's other kinds of models, like, you know, when I am working with interview transcripts, I use a bicycle of AI to transcribe my interviews. It's a really small AI model that does transcription. And I use, you know, for my book, I actually used a company that was like it was a European AI transcription service that was local. Like I could just download it and it was just running the transcription on my computer and never giving those interviews to another corporation. And it took a lot of research for me to find something like that, but it ended up being like the perfect alternative for my use case. And one of the things that I guess I would add is like at the moment, there's a lot of burden on the consumer. We have to do a lot of research and a lot of work as individuals to make these choices. And what we've seen with other industries, like with food or with fashion or with coffee, is that there are third-party organizations that become the investigators and auditors of the supply chains of different companies, and then they will label different companies based on their values and their track record, and on whether or not this is sustainable, or this is organic, or this is protecting labor rights. And through that, consumers then can make better choices. And so you can already start making more nuanced choices in your own life, but also we have to fill this particular gap of having organizations that can do some of that heavy lifting for us, and then also create more alternatives, more bicycles of AI that are just easier to use and can immediately just be picked up off the shelf, the way that you can download an app onto your phone like ChatGPT, so that it becomes more seamless for us to immediately vote with our feet.
Yes. Talk to us about the dangers of everyone participating in the systems without necessarily knowing what's happening with their data in terms of surveillance right now.
Yeah.
Because that I know is on everyone's mind. I think that yeah, just understanding how is that operating in this empire.
Yeah, so these tools, I mean, are the most powerful surveillance machines that have been ever invented. Back in, people always frame it as just a more powerful search, but that's not exactly true. First of all, it's not true because they provide faulty information. But second of all, you did not upload your medical records to Google. That was not a thing that you did, right? People are having deeply intimate conversations with these chatbots. They're uploading really personal, private things, believing somehow that these companies are not going to use it for other purposes. And there was a story, I started thinking about this a lot. I think it was 2 years ago during New Year's. Do you remember the Texas truck bombing incident? And in the story, the police discovered that the guy was planning the bombing because he had been talking with ChatGPT. And so they had access to his ChatGPT transcripts. And I realized in that moment that ChatGPT, like in the past, this has happened before, where a crime happens and then authorities will request the search records of the person from Google, and you can see the Google search results. But with Google search results, you don't really capture the true intent of the person because it's just a bunch of words strung together. But with chatbots, you capture exactly their thought process, the planning and steps that they took to ultimately do the thing. And that's almost like you're sort of getting the same utility out of these tools. Like you're just getting another information processing system. But the companies are getting far more out of you. They're getting much deeper, much more granular levels of data. And in the case of these, and we keep hearing, there was the other case of the mass shooting that happened in Tumbler Ridge in Canada, where it was once again, it was planned on ChatGPT. And we're getting like pockets, windows of visibility into the surveillance machine when there are these crimes that happen, because then the police will demand that they have access to these records. But there's this tendency then for people to think, well, actually, it's good that we have these surveillance machines because then we have visibility into these crimes. But I don't actually think that this is good at all. I mean, what we should be doing is these companies are enabling these crimes by making their tools capable of helping people plan them. And they should be stopping these tools from doing that. And instead, what they do is they create this ground for AI-enabled crimes. And then when everyone is devastated by the outcome of the crime, they're like, I have a fix for that, more surveillance. And so what they've done in the Canadian case is they have offered the provincial government, we will start sending you notifications every time someone in Canada seems to be doing something fishy. And that's, I mean, in this moment in the US, can you imagine if we did, like, every time someone is even just complaining on ChatGPT and uses some colorful language, that's just sent to the authorities? an immigrant that's using the tool and then it's just sent to ICE. Like this is like a crazy degree of surveillance that has just crept in to every facet and like into every person's pocket under the guise of a friend, a personal assistant.
That's terrifying. And exactly why I asked the question, because, it's one thing if they need to subpoena or put out a warrant or something like that. But the companies have this information, they have access to it all the time. And that's the whole point, is they are actually harvesting our data. And so they are monitoring it and they are using it and have access to it readily at their fingertips.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how Empire is showing up in really overt ways in terms of the use of AI in war right now as bombs rain down all over the Middle East. Talk about how these companies are helping to facilitate the destruction of people's lands and lives through war.
Yeah, so 2 weekends ago, I don't know if people were following some of the news about this. There was this big spat between Anthropic, one of OpenAI's competitors, and the Department of War. Yeah, so somehow Anthropic came out of this mess looking really good. And I just need to correct the record on this. First of all, the history of Anthropic is that it was a splinter group from OpenAI. I talk in my book about this history. So the CEO, Dario Amodei, and the main executives at the company, they used to all be executives at OpenAI. And then they left and created a competitor because they didn't trust Sam Altman. And in doing so, they basically duplicated the company in terms of the number of data centers that are now being built, the amount of energy that now needs to be used, because they're taking the same exact approach. They like to position themselves as taking a different, safer approach, but this is like the clean coal of AI. It's still coal, and clean coal doesn't actually exist. So like they kind of skip over the fact that the fundamentals of what they are building still has all of the same extractive and exploitative inputs. And so that's one thing. But then the second thing is, how can you complain that the Department of War used your technologies for war when you were first in line to give them that technology? And that's what the Pentagon does. Like, what did you think they were going to do? Use it to write their emails? Like, and obviously they did think that it was for military operations, because Anthropic was being used by the Department of War through another platform, through Palantir's platform, which is literally for analyzing intelligence and conducting military operations. And when Dario Amodei then said, in this like holier than thou way, oh, we really held the red line on two things: mass surveillance of Americans and fully autonomous weapons. He then had an interview in CBS like the day after Anthropic was declared as a supply chain risk. And he was like, actually, in principle, we have no problem with fully autonomous weapons. We just didn't think that this version of Claude should be used for that. But we offered to the Pentagon to help them build fully autonomous weapons with future versions of Claude. And so it's like okay, but then if this version of Claude is also not ready, there is a lot of research that shows that then it should just not be used in military operations at all. Because the reason why it's not ready, Anthropic has explicitly said, it's inaccurate. So they want a human to look over the data before targets that are identified by the tool are bombed. But when a person in the military is told, this bot has analyzed millions of data points and generated these target lists, now fact check it, that person's just going to be like, well, crap, like I didn't analyze millions of data points. This seems fine. And they're just going to take the list as is, which is, we've seen again and again that happens across different contexts. And so by Amodei being okay with having the Pentagon use this faulty technology in this current iteration of military operations, it already should have been a red line. There should never have been this integration of this tool. And now, like, we know that this tool is being used for the bombing of Iran, and we know that there was a school that got bombed. with children under the age of 12 and bombed twice. So when first responders and parents rushed to the scene to try and save any kids that might still be alive, they were killed as well in the second strike. And so there's now genuine speculation. Was this one of the targets that Claude identified? Because Claude apparently identified 1,000 targets to bomb. And the Pentagon has said that they do not have any more information to provide on questions that they've been asked in this regard. And so we're not going to know unless they are pulled in front of Congress for literally an examination of the full inner workings of how they ultimately arrived at this decision. And irrespective of whether or not this specific school was bombed because of an AI misidentification, it is exemplary of exactly the kind of mistake that will happen as the Department of War continues to rely on this technology.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that one of the functions is to be able to identify targets more quickly. And honestly, there's not necessarily concern about collateral damage, you know? And so we see it basically facilitating more rapid and more extreme destruction, which is fine for those who are benefiting from war, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the beneficiaries again? Here we're battling against Blackstone, and it's a private equity firm. And so it's not just, you know, the CEOs and the executives at the top of these companies, but it's people who are investing in these companies' expansion and you know, are benefiting from all of those points of exploitation that you mentioned, because they are cutting costs in other ways and maximizing profit. So because we're engaged in that fight here, I'm curious, what is the role of the investor class, and private equity in particular? And do you have any examples where folks have been able to interject at that level in terms of regulation or resistance in any way?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I mean, it's investors that are playing a huge role in inflating the bubble. And when I talk with some investors, it's not, like they don't actually have like an investment thesis around why they are doing this. It's because everyone else is doing it and they don't want to miss out. And they think that they can cash out before the bubble bursts. So it doesn't matter if they're feeding into a bubble because they'll still be better off at the end of it. And that is like Meredith Whitaker, who's the president of Signal Foundation, which makes the Signal messaging app, encrypted messaging app. She has said before that hype is a feature, not a bug, of the investor ecosystem, especially the VC venture capital ecosystem in San Francisco. They need to hype things as much as possible to keep the party going so that they can cash out before it ends. Like that is the entire strategy. As long as I'm not the sucker that's the last guy, I will be fine. And that is essentially what, like with Blackstone, the fact that they are now entering on like the infrastructure level is, I think, so exemplary of this, because many people are now feeling that the AI models themselves are the biggest bubble, because there are a lot of companies that have actually stopped using these technologies because they're not actually finding value out of it. So OpenAI, Google, they're actually having trouble selling these tools. And in fact, there was this crazy thing that Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, said recently, where he was like, we need governments to help us generate consumer demand for our technology. And I'm like, there's something deeply wrong about that entire statement. But Blackstone is now, like, instead of investing in the AI layer, they're now investing in the layer under, which is the infrastructure layer, because they think that the infrastructure layer can maybe go on, the party can go on for longer before it bursts, and they can cash out before it bursts. In terms of like legislation or regulation or protests that has happened, I think this is the first example that I've found new energy economies work. which is part of the reason why I was so excited to come, and learn more and support. But I haven't actually seen a lot of people intervening for the AI industry. I've seen it in other aspects, in other types of technologies. So there's this project called Surveillance Watch. Yeah, Surveillance Watch, that just looks at surveillance technologies, which of course is you could say is a branch or offshoot of the broader AI industry. But this is a project that tracks all of the funders that fund surveillance technologies. And I think that is one really great act of resistance and protest. It's just revealing who is actually profiting off of this. Because once you know, then you can then engage in further actions. And it would be great if there was, you know, an AI industry watch or an AI empire watch or something like that, that also tracked all the funders fueling this madness.
Wow. Thank you. And yeah, in terms of Blackstone here in New Mexico, I'll just take a quick second to explain why they're so interested in the infrastructure build out. Because like you said, regardless of what ends up happening with the data centers that they will be profiting from, they will have captive ratepayers who will have built out all of those energy systems on our backs, and they'll get what's called stranded assets. So we'll actually keep paying for them even after they close. So this is really important to understand, is it is the best exploitation model, because they also, when they build in the energy sector in a regulated monopoly system like we have here in New Mexico, they have guaranteed profit. So they are able to not only collect all of the money that they invest in capital back from ratepayers through rates, but they also have what's called a guaranteed rate of return. They actually have a guaranteed profit margin. And so the more they build, the more they profit. And we know that that's why they're interested in a small company like PNM, because they see the prospects of building out these data centers, building out all the energy necessary. And then regardless of whether or not it's needed for the data centers in the future, they'll still be able to charge all of us through rates. So it's pretty much epitomizes exploitation. And we're really grateful that you're here to help us understand how it's related to this larger empire and the economic shifts, so that we can do a better job resisting. I want to turn to the audience now. You all have been wonderful, and there are many questions. Also, we will take a few questions online, so go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. Let's go over here first, and let me hand you the mic.
Hi, my name is Jerome Morrison. Thank you for being here with us today. The question that I haven't seen really answered by the people doing research in AI is how Europe is tackling this issue as well, particularly because they have things like, better access to healthcare, better access to therapy, not as much of like the loneliness epidemic that we're dealing with here in America. And so what are some of the ways that through legislation, through the EU, that they're dealing with this, and how are the people of Europe also like interacting with, or is their usage as high as it is here in America? That's something I'm not seeing so much of that comparison. And have you done any research like that yet?
That's such a great question. I've actually never looked at the usage stats comparison, but I can talk about some of the differences that I've noticed. So one thing I've noticed is, OpenAI recently and Anthropic both rolled out these like ChatGPT for Health, Claude for Health platforms. I don't know if people notice this. It hasn't become a feature that everyone is able to have, but they've been doing these like slow rollouts, picking small pockets of users. And the whole premise is like, trust us and upload all of your medical information because you've already been doing some of it. And we are going to provide you these kinds of healthcare services because healthcare is such a disaster in this country, and we want to help get you answers. They are unable to roll it out in Europe because of laws.
Good.
So, and they're unable to roll it out in the UK. I'm not 100% sure which law it is, but there's two laws that I think are possible candidates. One is the GDPR, General Data Protection Act, which is their data privacy law, which of course we still don't have one in the US, that's at the federal level. And then their other one is the EU AI Act, which regulates different types of AI tools based on a risk model. Like if an AI technology is particularly risky, such as a surveillance technology, then it has much stricter regulations on where it can even be applied than, you know, an AI technology that's like being used for drug discovery, for example. And I think it's one of the two that has blocked the expansion of this particular feature. So if there are not differences currently in usage, there will probably increasingly become differences because there will be features that are available here for more extraction of people's data that cannot be implemented over there. The other thing that I think Europe is really bifurcated right now in the AI conversation because half of the conversation is fixated on why don't we have our own big tech giants? And the other half is like, thank God we don't have our own big tech giants. And how do we block the American tech giants from colonizing us? And it's this weird debate that's happening in part because of, I think, the challenge that people have in thinking that the AI that's being developed by these companies is the only option. It's either this or nothing. And usually when I'm speaking in audiences to Europe, I'm saying like, actually, there's so many other AI technologies that you could benefit from that are not going to be built, that don't have to be built by the American tech giants, that can be built by European companies, like the, you know, the AI speech recognition tool that I was using. I specifically chose a European company because I knew that they would protect my data, and also because it was running like without internet on my computer. But yeah, when I reframe it, then like the other camp that is like, why don't we have our own tech giants, starts to be like, oh wait, we could actually just be building totally different types of AI tools that are more beneficial. And so yeah, this is like a strange aspect of the European mentality right now. And the other thing is like, because they have a war at their doorsteps, like the Russia-Ukraine conflict has made them really freaked out about national security, and there is this really big push to militarize, just like you know here, and which then kind of infests a lot of the logic around how to invest in technologies and which technologies to build.
And can you just share really quick to finish the answer to that question in terms of in the United States, AI regulation? My understanding is there's like an executive order that Trump put out so that states can't you know, have regulation that is specific to the state level. But what is there any regulation that exists?
Yeah, so Trump tried twice to get a ban on state level AI laws through Congress, which if it had passed through Congress would have been like, that would have been a really big deal. In remarkable news, and this is like going back to the optimism, when he tried to do this, 99 out of 100 senators said no. That's crazy. 99 senators on the same side of an issue. Again, like when have we seen that ever? And so after he failed twice through Congress, he then did the executive order. But the executive order doesn't really have teeth because it basically says we want, like, we're gonna sue states if they try to regulate AI. But states are like, okay, come at us.
Yeah.
And they're still regulating the industry and passing bills. And you know, like there've been, I'm not a legal scholar, so I can't say exactly like the legitimacy of this, but there are other legal scholars that are saying like the executive order is not going to actually hold up in the courts. Like when they then sue the states, the courts are probably going to just say like, no, this is not a legitimate case because it's also just infringing on states' rights. So yeah, like, and this whole thing is crazy because of course, like Trump's original platform was all about protecting state rights, and then like the first thing that he does is to try to eliminate all states' rights.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's actually a lot of AI legislation that is happening at the state level. And this is where I think actually like the most effective ways of countering the AI industry through legislative action can happen is through local and state governments, because the federal government is just, it's not, you know, it's not going in the right direction. But there was like a huge AI safety bill that was passed in California and also in New York that put in some requirements for companies to be more transparent about exactly how they are developing and testing their models for different types of harms. There have been a number of bills proposed to protect ratepayers from increases from infrastructure expansions. There was one, unfortunately, some of these bills have been killed, but they are really great examples of bills that could then, the New Mexico state legislature could try to pick up and try to pass in New Mexico instead. But there was one in Washington that would have it would have required companies building these data centers to pay for all of their costs. So they would not have been able to translate any of the costs to ratepayers. It would have also required companies to declare how much energy they were actually using. There's another bill, and unfortunately that one was killed because of lobbying. There's another one that's going through California now where it would require companies to report how much energy and water the data centers are using to make that more transparent. There are a lot of local jurisdictions that have just banned data center development outright. In Georgia, there are cases where this is not legislative action, but towns have completely unelected officials because of their track record on data centers not reflecting the will of the people. And that's happened, I think, in 3 or 4 towns in both Georgia and New Jersey now. So there's actually a lot of activity happening at the legislative and the political level, as well as the grassroots level.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, let's go back here.
Hi, my name is Nancy. Yeah. Hi, my name is Nancy, and I watched a movie a couple of weeks ago. It's called Little Pink House, and it's about New London, Connecticut, where Pfizer said, "You know what? We want to build this great plant right on the shores. We have to get rid of these houses." And the owners of those houses, the people who've been living there for, however long, said, "No, we're not moving." But Pfizer gives a sweet enough deal to the legislature in Connecticut that they effectively use eminent domain to take these people's homes and level the ground. And after the tax incentives wore off, Pfizer took off. So what does that leave New London with? Nothing. So I don't think it's any different. It's just a different industry, same playbook.
You're exactly right. There's already been cases of this happening. So I can't remember which town it was in the US where there was a huge protest against the data center. The data center got blocked by the people, and then the government decided we are going to evoke some kind of national security justification for forcing the project through. This is the case where that official better be elected out of office, and interestingly, unfortunately, there have already been some cases of this, but interestingly, more and more politicians are starting to orient their campaigns and their language around not doing this because they have realized their job is now on the line when they try to do this funny business. So I think that that is like a crucial point of protest and resistance is to make politicians aware that they do not have job security if they do that stuff, because there are otherwise going to be many attempts to do that stuff. And similarly, in addition to using these weird clauses to force projects through, there's also been a trend where companies require local politicians to sign NDAs now before they even discuss bringing a data center project in, so that there can't be protests until the contract has been fully signed. And companies will use, actually, a couple years ago, I interviewed this group in New Mexico. They're called the New Mexico Water Watchers. If you're familiar with them, they actually protested the metadata center that is now built. and expanding. But they were the ones that told me that companies will use these shell companies to enter into communities. So they used this shell, Meta used a shell company called Greater Kudu LLC to build the data center. And it wasn't until once again the deal and the contract and sign and so on. So like this level of opacity and these tactics that these companies and also politicians will use to try and actually quash the democratic process is one of the things that needs to be protested early and often, and vote the politicians out when they do this, because that is the most anti-democratic thing that they could possibly do, building these massive infrastructure projects that affect their community without their community's input.
People are so excited. I'm so many questions. We're gonna do 2 more here and then we'll go online.
Thanks so much, Karen, for being here. I really appreciate that you helped us all not feel like conspiracy theorists, so thank you for writing your book. I have a question for Karen and one for Bianca, maybe we put a pin in it, but we just finished the lunch session here. I want to know what bills are being proposed for next session and how we can support new energy economy in that, help lobby, whatever we can do as citizens. In New Mexico, we are oppressed by nuclear colonialism. And Microsoft, I think, has signed with 3 Mile Island. Can you talk more about that and why there is not more discussion about reinstituting these nuclear plants to power this stuff?
Yes. I actually just the energy professor that I was talking about, that I was talking with in Vancouver, he handed me a copy of his book, which is called Nuclear is Not the Answer, and it's sitting in my suitcase right now, and I like need to read it urgently so that I will have an even more in-depth answer for you later on. But yeah, so the reason why Microsoft established this new deal with 3 Mile Island is because of the problem where these companies are now trying to circumvent needing to wait for a connection to the grid. So they're trying to just plug directly into a power plant, or even just build a power plant with these microgrid solutions. And Microsoft was building this facility in Pennsylvania, and then they were like, there's this power plant right here, let's just turn it back on. In this particular case, they're not turning on the one that had the meltdown. But is that better? I'm not sure. But this is going to become a huge trend, because all of these companies, they have technically sustainability and climate commitments. They said in 2020 that they would eliminate all of their emissions. Instead, there was a report by the United Nations last year that showed that they have dramatically increased their emissions by 150%. Right. And actually, this is like a low ball because it's using the data that the company provides itself, and it's heavily massaged. But just think about like the best possible numbers that they could come up with still show a 150% increase in emissions. And so all of the hyperscalers, Microsoft, Google, they're all under heavy pressure to fix the narrative that they have become some of the biggest climate polluters in the world. And so this is their campaign. They're like, nuclear is going to solve it. We're going to build all of these modular nuclear reactors that are going to pop up next to every single data center that we build. And it's going to provide cheap, free, clean, abundant energy. And they're not just doing this in the US. They just struck this huge deal with India as well, to do this all across India, because there was this big international AI conference in India just a few weeks ago. And the outcome of the conference was that these companies are going to do whatever they want in India and use India almost as a test bed for then what they're going to bring to the US and to other parts of the world. So it is a huge push on the company's part. They are also trying to unwind nuclear regulation now to be able to build these nuclear reactors faster. So it is yet another frontier that they're opening up for huge, problematic environmental degradation and catastrophe. And obviously, I mean, to go back to optimism again. When Microsoft turned on 3 Mile Island, this was a huge, it caused a huge backlash. Like all of a sudden, a lot more people. I started getting a lot more requests from different communities being like, wait, I didn't actually realize it used that much energy. And I was like, oh yeah. And so I think this is actually still, even as the companies are pushing down this path, this is yet another entry point for more conversation, more debate, and more pushback, because the discourse in the US around nuclear is already kind of skeptical, which is like we're already starting in a relatively good place for this to happen. And given that the companies are trying to pivot towards this, like if protests happen and this vector of energy development is stopped, like the companies are out of options, So in a sense, even though the empire feels like its tentacles are expanding in all these places, these companies are really vulnerable. Like they're running out of solutions for how to actually build their facilities and power their facilities and get the things that they need done. And they're getting really desperate. Like I was actually talking with some OpenAI employees just a couple weeks ago, where they were saying that internally they understand that their revenue targets are insane. And they need everything to go flawlessly to even have an iota of hope to achieve it. So let's help make it not flawless.
Okay, we're gonna do one more question. I feel like I'm neglected this side of the room, so I'm gonna go home. Oh, I will come back. Sorry, thank you. Yes, we'll close with like what we can do on the ground here. Thank you for asking me. I'm gonna go all the way back here.
Hi there, my name is Tyler, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your optimism. I think it's very easy to fall down when like we're just so upset. So thank you for bringing some perspective into it. I also wanted to ask, you mentioned a little bit about the AI bubble. I think we all know historically that bubbles don't necessarily mean something goes away after it's up. I'm wondering if you have a prediction for what you think that NATO might be, what might be the topic. And after, do you see any ethical applications of AI?
Sorry, what was the last word?
Any ethical application for
Ethical applications of AI. Okay. So I don't like doing predictions because I think that predicting the future makes it feel inevitable, and we make the future. So what we do today is going to help decide what the future will be. And I think when it comes to like, we should anticipate that the probability of a bubble is very high. But what we do now will determine how we rebuild after the bubble. And Naomi Klein, her book Shock Doctrine talks about how disasters are usually a moment in which things get worse because the government or company swoops in and they engage in yet more surveillance, more disaster capitalism, more militarization, and more of the things that we don't want. But it's the movements that we build now and the collective resistance that we foster today that will allow us to avoid that version of the future and to help us rebuild actually more sustainable solutions and more community-based solutions. And so, yeah, like I can't say like if the bubble will pop, but I can say that like we just need to be working today on making sure that if and when it does, that there will be better outcomes. In terms of ethical applications of AI, I do believe that there are ethical applications, but it comes down to how the AI was built in the first place. Do I think that an AI system that is built on extraordinary extraction and surveillance and exploitation can then be ethically applied? Not really. But I talk in my epilogue in my book about this Indigenous community in New Zealand that started engaging in a project a few years back to build an AI speech recognition tool for their community. This is an organization called Tahika Media. They're a nonprofit radio station that broadcasts into Maori, the language of the Maori people. And they wanted to provide their rich archive of broadcasts as a resource to the Maori community to help facilitate language revitalization, because like many indigenous peoples around the world, the Maori almost lost their language due to colonization. And the Tahitian media thought, you know, we have all these archives of our ancestors speaking without the distortions of the colonizers, and what an amazing treasure trove for people to listen to. But they didn't want to just open it up as just a raw archive. They wanted to create some kind of application that would facilitate people's language learning. So they were going to be able to listen to the archive, see a transcription of each of the recordings, be able to click on words that they didn't know, get a translation, so that it really helped accelerate their language learning. And Te Media ran into this problem, which is they don't have enough proficient Te Reo Maori speakers to do the transcription at the scale that they needed it done. That's where they realized that AI is actually a really great tool for this, because they could build an AI speech recognition tool specifically for Te Reo Maori, and then they could teach this speech recognition tool to transcribe the audio. And the first thing that they did, they went about this in a completely different way from Silicon Valley. The first thing that they did, they convened a council of their elders and asked permission from their elders for whether or not they even should build this tool, understanding that as an AI speech recognition tool can be used for helping language revitalization. It can also be used for surveillance, right? And so it was only with the consent of the community that they then embarked on the project. And they taught the community what kind of data would we need, what quantity of data would we need, and also how are we going to protect your data to make sure that it is only ever used for the things that the community agrees to and not for something like surveillance. Like, how do we make sure that data doesn't fall into the hands of a government entity or a big tech entity to harm the community? And because they chose to build a very small task-specific AI model, or a bicycle of AI, and not this colossal everything machine that's supposed to consume the whole earth, they only had to use 2 computer chips to train this tool, and they only had to collect a small pool of data. And because they had a lot of buy-in from the community, they were able to collect that data through a data donation drive in just a few days. And so they built the model, and then they continued going back to the community to ask, is this the right model? What kind of application do you actually want? Like, how do we design it to make sure it really does help you in your language learning? And what other types of models would you want to build through the same participatory consentful process? And in the end, you know, they have not just built this tool for their community, they've actually created a platform to help other Indigenous languages all around the world engage in the same process of building AI models for the Indigenous peoples, to help facilitate their sovereignty, reverse historic inequities, and continue to engage in this participatory process. And so that's where I find AI being ethically applied, because it was also ethically developed. And this is where I think we should be orienting our entire vision of AI. Like, why are we trying to build these everything machines that no one really wants, and that is using our land and our water and our labor? And why not be building these bottoms up tools that are driven first and foremost, not by the advancement of AI for AI's sake, but by the community's own goals and visions of what they want to be?
I'm gonna take a couple of questions online. And this one is sort of piggybacking off of what you just shared. So Esperanza says, I really enjoyed your book, especially the chapters on Chile, Kenya, and New Zealand. In what ways is our understanding of AI limited in the United States, and what role does international governance and solidarity play in the undoing of empire?
What a great question. Yeah, I think because we have all these tech giants on our soil, we are limited in that they have for so long been dictating not just AI. It's the same companies that gave us social media. It's the same companies that gave us all of these other online platforms that we feel forced to use. You know, like, I still use all of the Google products. I still use Google Search. I still use Gmail. And it feels like because we have been submissive for so long as just consumers of these platforms, that this AI wave, as it's come upon us, like I hear most often this sense of, well, it's inevitable and it's coming and we have to use it anyway, from Americans. It's usually in other places that don't have the tech giants looming over them, that have been forced to come up with creative solutions like the Tihiku Media, simply because they literally do not have the resources to compete at that level, that have often come up with the most interesting, oh, but what if we reimagine something entirely different? And in terms of the international solidarity, one of the beautiful things that has been happening is, as more and more grassroots resistance movements have popped up around the world, they have begun to connect with one another and to share tips and facilitate learning. I'm in this one group that's a bunch of water defenders and land defenders that are fighting data centers all across Latin America and Spain. And they trade tips all the time on stories that they're seeing. They're tracking the empire's expansion in this group chat and strategizing how they can help one another in this fight. And it's not just within fights of the same domain. I've seen there's this one group in the Congo that has been for years fighting the mineral extraction that's happening within their communities, and like child slave labor that is happening as part of the supply chain to consume more and more of the earth to produce these data centers. And what they have done throughout the years is to connect their fight with the data center fight, to connect their fight with the copper extraction that's happening in other places, the lithium extraction that's happening in other places, the psychological harm that's happening, because they're trying to build this narrative, which is a true narrative, that all of us are in fact engaging in the same fight. And I'm seeing this starting to pop up more and more. There was recently a initiative that was launched by creatives in Hollywood, where they created the Creators Coalition on AI, which is this cross-industry group that is trying to hold the line on the way that AI is being developed and adopted in Hollywood, and also hold the line on labor practices to ensure that workers are taken care of, and artists and writers and actors are all taken care of, instead of just having their data harvested as well. And in their campaign, their call to action was not just to the industry. It was to every single person in the world that believes that AI should be developed in a human-centered and respectful way, and not in an extractive and exploitative way. So I'm starting to see more and more of this calling out to one another, building these bridges across these movements. And I think it's very essential. And this is something that I'm also trying to do in my own work. I've been working with a bunch of journalists and scholars and civil society folks to create what we're calling the AI Resist List, which is a resource or sort of like a toolkit of sorts, where we're documenting different types of resistance movements all around the world as inspiration for other resistance movements to model themselves off of. And one of the big goals that we have is to show how each of these resistance movements are connected to each other and should be, in fact, joining forces with one another.
Wow. That's great. Okay, I'm going to get really practical with this last question online, which says, if we've used these tools like ChatGPT or whatever, how do we protect ourselves?
That's a great question. I'm pretty sure OpenAI offers features where you can delete your entire history and then delete your account, if that is the option that you want to take. And can I say that they fully respect this? I mean, they are legally obliged to, so hopefully they're following the law. And so I would say, like, yeah, there've been a number of days where I will do like a clean up my digital data footprint, like a spring cleaning type situation, where I will just block off hours and then go through all of the accounts that I was like forced to create at some point, and go and delete all of them, and send like emails to these companies to say, because so we don't have a federal privacy law, but California has a privacy law that most Americans can actually access, because companies end up just having a one-size-fits-all solution for all of the US. And when you go to companies and services, they will have a little request form as required by this law, where you email and say, you must remove all traces of my data. And so I do this on, you know, like not a regular enough cadence, but I budget time to like have this little thing. So start like a potluck where you gather up all of your friends and neighbors and family and maybe help each other navigate through the horrendously complicated process of doing this. And do it with OpenAI as well if that is what you want.
So thank you. Okay, so to answer, I'm gonna go back to the question that was asked about what folks can do in relation to Blackstone, and then we're gonna close up. So for everyone who maybe isn't aware, it's 11.5 purchase offer to take over PNM, and Blackstone is engaging in the process in front of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, which is the body in our government that is supposed to regulate utilities. And that purchase is not a done deal at all. They have to get approval from the 3 appointed regulators who will make the decision. Unfortunately, it is an appointed body. And our governor is in support of this whole economic vision in terms of, you know, advanced technology. So what we can do is we can put as much pressure in many different ways, not only on the PRC, but on the AG, which is an intervener, the Attorney General, who's supposed to be our consumer protector, right? And then groups like New Energy Economy have intervened. There are several other community-based groups that have intervened in the case. There's been public comment periods, and the PRC meets bi-weekly, and you can go and give public comment. We're asking folks to also submit letters to the editor. Basically, if there's enough public pressure, we know from our experience defeating the Avangrid merger, that it will take a huge amount of public pressure on these regulators to do the right thing, because they already have a lot of political pressure behind the scenes pointing the other direction. So participation in the process is really important. And it's also very important that there's just a sense of New Mexicans' outrage against this vision for our future, right? So it's not just about this case, but it's about the data center build out. It's about extraction. It's about the idea that we're going to have microgrids bringing on, you know, methane turbines that are more energy than all of us are already using. Then we have to stand up against these things, and we have to put forward a different vision. So we have a whole campaign. Dozens of organizations are involved in fighting the Blackstone merger. And in terms of the connect with AI, we really wanted to make that explicit, because the truth is Blackstone is not leading with this information. They're not saying, oh my goodness, we're salivating because we see all this infrastructure development that we can't wait to get our hands on because you guys are all captive ratepayers. You know, they're pretending like they're coming in because they're interested in just providing electricity for our homes and our businesses. So it's also very important that we tell the story of what's really happening and what their motivations are and how it's connected to this empire, right? And so we really appreciate Karen coming out here to help us understand more deeply the threats, the impact, and also what that picture is, so we can share that story with our friends. So we have a whole campaign. It includes things like house parties and postcards. It includes things that our organization is leading, and other really fun tactics that other organizations in the campaign are leading. So if you're an artist or you are interested in more edgy things, you know, there's lots of people that are participating and basically making it very clear that Blackstone is not welcome, and that it's not going to be politically expedient for them to come and for our decision makers to support their presence here in our state. It's also very important that we join together and fight projects like Project Jupiter, which, though it was pushed through the Doña Ana County Commission in similar ways as Karen was referencing, where people were signed NDA agreements and much of the information was not disclosed to the public. that process still has some hurdles to get through. Air quality permits is one, so we had thousands of New Mexicans who gave comment. Thank you all for those of you who participated in that process. There's also a pipeline they need to get reactivated in order to make that project viable. Yeah, and they also need to basically have the willing participation of the community in terms of all of the construction that's happening, et cetera. So there are lots of points of intervention, some of them, you know, political, others that have to do with direct action and other forms of resistance. So there's no lack of opportunity to get involved. What we're asking folks to do today is to basically sign up if you aren't already signed up through our mailing list so that we can be in touch with you about some of these opportunities. If you're someone who's ready to take this conversation into your neighborhood, into your home, and host a house party, we have a great short video for like folks to play to your friends. I think it's 12 minutes long, and it really explains the threat of Blackstone's takeover of our largest utility. And it's a great conversation piece. And these postcards will go to the Public Regulation Commission. So that this is something that you can do today. You can also take extras with you. And it is a huge uphill battle. This is the biggest campaign that we ever have had to undertake. Blackstone is, you know, the largest private equity firm in the world. And they have a lot of resources. So we need our people power to band together in order to have any chance, but we believe it's possible. And for many of the reasons that Karen said, you actually just to make this less lucrative for them does a lot, because they are looking at those, you know, those profit margins, and they're expecting a certain profit. And they're expecting also a certain pathway. And when we obstruct that pathway, it makes their job a lot harder, and that calculus changes. So we hope everyone will get involved. We're really grateful to Karen for all of her insight. And I wanted to just close, you shared a beautiful vision in terms of appropriate application of this technology. But I wanted to return to you personally and just say, right now, what is the source of your greatest hope? Like, you're on this book tour, you're just going. Right now, in this moment, what is actually fueling you to keep this up?
When I first started writing about AI and I told people that I wrote about AI, no one cared, right? Like, because people they just didn't know what AI was. They didn't like understand how it was affecting them. And now it's become the most important topic ever. And this is what gives me so much energy, is because the first step of figuring out where we go from here is by getting everyone to talk about it, and by getting everyone to learn about it, and to educate themselves, educate their families, and then think together collectively, dream together collectively about where we go from here. And so that's what's is so exciting, is like the first step is already done. Like, everyone everywhere is talking about this and grappling with these really fundamental questions about how we actually want this technology to be introduced into our lives, that ultimately leads to much more fundamental questions about just how do we want to be living our lives and how do we want to be building the future. And I just cannot imagine us not getting to a better place when everyone's energy is focused on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you have a question that wasn't answered, Karen will be signing books. The book is amazing. So if you don't already have a copy, please get your copies over there. And thank you so much for joining. And please stay in touch and get active in the campaign. Thank you.
Does the Blackstone have an actual website? Is there like a central website?
Example of our.
On We's website, we have like a whole
Someone with
section,
your empathy,
around the Blackstone
your
culture.
skills,
That would be the
communication.
best program too.
Can be
That includes the other.
Thank you very much.
Is there like a?
Yeah, I mean, sharing our organizing work, so like if one person else doing something, it'll also be.
So it's all on, it's all on, you know, what's the other one stuff?
Yeah, but if you're, I mean, what if you're, like, are you, think about how to.
That is a really good question that I think should probably be directed to Bianca, because I have less understanding of the fine grained details.
But not, he's fucking here. I live here, so.
I don't know how Canada operates currently, so I'm not really sure how. And it's not currently operating.
It's her appointed. So.
And you're saying that like, would you be in favor of the proposal of